In today's video, we're going to show you the best ways to get a bulletproof scratch coat in rendering. We're going to show you some exclusive techniques, how to get the render on the wall, but more importantly, show you some tactics, how to make sure that your render is going to stay tight on the wall without any cracks and without any major issues. So let's go into today's video, and we're going to walk you through the exact process I use to get a bulletproof render. First problem I've noticed with this wall is how dry it is. Now, it is face brickwork, and this particular type of brick, you can tell it's just sucking all the moisture out of it. So the big problem would be to carry on as if nothing's happening. What we're gonna have to do, we haven't got an outside tap at the moment, so just got this, which is pressure washer, which is rubbish. But we're just gonna have to hose it down bit by bit and do panel by panel. But the worst thing is to render on a really dry surface. So you can use a pre-grit or you can just hose it down, but either way, don't ignore the fact that it's dry. It's just going to pull all moisture out of the render and you're going to have problems. Now, as you've seen at the beginning of the video, what we've done is we've measured the roll of mesh, which is render mesh, what we used at the beginning of the video. We've cut it back, and now what we're going to use and show you a way to apply it to the render. Now, the first thing for bulletproof render is to make sure that you apply your render in layers. So what we've got is a nice tight coat of render applied on the wall at first. Now, we've wetted the walls up, we make sure there's enough moisture in the brickwork, we make sure that it's not going to suck all the moisture out of the render, because like we said, that's a big no-go. But what we're going to do is apply a really nice coat. Now, what this is going to ensure is that when we apply the render, it's going to have a nice strong grip to the brick. So when we push all that pressure, it's going to have a nice key, it's going to be set into the brickwork, and we're going to make sure it's got a strong bond. If you add about 20 mil of render in one go, the weight's going to pull it off the brickwork, and the weight itself is going to ease its way from the background you're putting onto. So what you really want to make sure is, one, you're applying lots of pressure, and if you do it in up to small layers at first, you can ensure that you've got a nice strong build, and it's going to build up over a series of coats. Now, this is the next thing that's going to make it bulletproof. We're going to add the render mesh to the render. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, we've cut this, rolled them up, and I've just applied them next to each panel. What you do is, about 1.2 meters at a time, you apply the render, and then you bed the mesh into the render itself. So what you do is all the pressure pulling that back to the front, and it's going to make sure that's bedded nicely into the wall. And then you add another thin layer of render on top of that. If you don't do this, you're not going to be able to scratch it. You're not going to be able to give it that mechanical key you need for when you apply the top coat. So we apply the render, embed the mesh, and then add another thin layer on top of that. So now I've added the moisture, it's going to be a lot easier to rule off. So as you can see, we've got a lot of time left in that render. Now, if we didn't moisten the walls, if we didn't wet it up, it'd just be pulling in, and we wouldn't be able to do this part, which is ruling. We always want to be ruling the scratch coat. So when it comes to the top coat, we've got a nice level background to work on. It's not going to dry in different areas. If you have a humpy, undulated wall scratch coat, then the top coat's going to take different areas, different timings. You want it all to go off at the same time. So that's why we need to rule our scratch coats and make sure everything's dead flat. Now, the other thing is, here we've got a drip bead that runs all the way across the DPC line. Now, this is for a reason. If you look down, you'll see that we just sat in water. Basically, the water's collecting in the corner of the paving. What I've got here is water. This is allow the water can rise up through the render if we don't cut along the line. So basically, put a drip bead along your DPC line, so that way the moisture can't travel past the brick. If we didn't have that and we rendered down to the ground, then the moisture can collect through the render and just travel past. So this is going to be a breaker for the moisture below the DPC line between the ground and this bit slab of render. Actually stop bead, and what I'm going to do is render to it, and you won't even see it, you won't even see the detail, you just know there's going to be a plastic breaker between the two layers. So it's a more subtle way of applying a stop and a break for the DPC. You can also leave the bottom exposed, but because it's quite high and it's not going to marry to the front, I'm just going to render it all. Now let's go through it. This is the whole process. And I'm going to walk you through first person view. By the way, it's a new camera, so let me know how you feel about this. First person view on me rendering this panel. Like I said, we're doing it in small sections at a time. Now why do we do that? We do that so the render doesn't dry out too fast. Like I said, we're adding a thin layer to the brick, block, whatever background you're working on. You don't want that render to dry before you've had a chance to apply your mesh. So you're working in a little area at a time. Now I've started from the top, obviously working down to the bottom. And what we need to make sure is there's enough moisture in that render so when we apply the mesh, we're going to be able to pull it through. If you apply too much of a big stretch of render, it's going to dry out too fast. And when you go to put the mesh into it, you're not going to be able to squeeze it through. Now I'll show you that in a minute. I'll show you why it's so important. So that's why we're working little areas like this at a time. And it's a hot day, I'm not going to lie, we had a bit of a freakish heat and the back wall has just been fully exposed to the sun all day, so I'll be honest, I've got to work fast. And as a side note, rendering is not easy, it's tough on the body and it takes a lot of hard work. And as you can see, I've really got a shift in this video. Like I said then, we've got this small panel applied, we've got a thin coat of layer to the render, it's nicely pressed into the brick, and now I'm going to get the mesh. Now I didn't even cut this, I've just ran it from the roll itself, and then as long as you're holding on to it, you can just squeeze it through. As you can see, the render's still wet, so when I trowel over it, the render's squeezing through the mesh, it's squeezing through the gaps, and that's how you're able to embed it into the wall. Like I said, if you leave it too long, you won't be able to do this because it'll be too dry. So that's why you need to make sure you're working in smaller sections at a time. And we're putting a lot of pressure again to squeeze through that mesh. That mesh is going to tie all the brickwork together. If you've ever seen or used any mesh, it's really strong stuff. Even though it's still quite thin, it's really capable of holding a lot of render together, and it kind of ties itself into one. So if there is any movement in that brickwork, blockwork, whatever you're working on, it's going to tie it together and potentially stop the cracks from forming through onto the top coat. Now we're applying another thin layer on top of that, and like I said, if we don't have the space to apply a scratch, then what will happen is when we come to apply the top coat, it's just going to fall off. So we need to apply this extra layer on top to make sure we've got space to provide the key via the scratcher. Another good note, I'm not using sand cement, I'm using a bagged render called OCR. I actually do think it's the way forward. I think it's a stronger product. There's a lot more polymers added to it, and there's a lot more additives that's going to make it stronger, and there's no worrying about the mix. A big thing with render with sand cement is if your mix isn't bang on, then you will have problems in the future. This is a bag product, all you do is literally add it to the mix, all the work's done for you, and for anyone who's not used a bagged render yet, I'd definitely recommend it. Now, like I said previously in the video, we've applied render and I always rule it back. And this just means that when it comes to applying the top coat, your strength isn't necessarily going to be there, but it just means that you've got a nice even background to work on. So the ruling isn't necessarily for the strength, it's just for making sure that your top coat goes on evenly, and it means you've got a nice background to work on, which actually when it comes to applying the top coat, it means that you've got a nice background to work on, you've got a nice key because we've added the extra thickness on top, and it means that overall you're going to have stronger walls. Now this is how you get a bulletproof scratch coating rendering. Now for this system we use sand cement, but if you want to see the best rendering system I've used, silicon render, then check out this video on the left and I'll show you a full guide on how you can use silicon rendering for yourself and explain why this could be the best rendering system you can use.